George, would you please? There we go, George. Okay. Sorry for the slight delay. George Tsouris, a professor of philosophy and Japanese culture, filmmaker, musical composer, and animator from New York City, and the host of the self-named YouTube channel, George Tsouris. So, George, please tell us about yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, I grew up in Los Angeles. I moved to New York. It was kind of always a dream. I don't know why, maybe too much TV. But New York had a sort of fascination with me, even though I lived in Los Angeles. And for university, since 2001, I've been in New York City. So I guess that's 22 years or 21. Yeah.
What drew you to New York City?
I don't know. I can never, I'm very bad at articulating these sorts of attractions that I have. But there was a fascination. I'll tell you one anecdote. I remember when I was telling my friends, oh, well, yeah, George, you're going to go to New York City. Well, that's great because New York City is filled with a bunch of assholes and you're a small little asshole. So you'll fit right in or something like that. And I don't know that was exactly what drew me here, but there was something about the grittiness and the
okay.
that kind of said, oh, wow, I want to that Los Angeles. Listen, Los Angeles is beautiful. A lot of people don't like Los Angeles, by the way. That was my experience once I left Los Angeles. Los Angeles is not a real city. And upon reflection, of course, it's not really a real city. But, it's...
what was it like growing up in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I liked growing up in Los Angeles because for me, it was an hour to get anywhere. An hour to get to the ocean and hang out at the beach. Wow. An hour to go to the mountains and go snowboarding. An hour to go to the desert and do what you do in the desert and things like that, biking. A few hours away was Vegas. Now I had to wait a few years before I could go to Las Vegas because of age requirements, age limitations. It was great. And the thing about Los Angeles is that it's so sprawling. It's so sprawling. It's so wide. And it's not a very confined place. So when I came to New York, it was fascinating to me that I think within the first couple of days, I walked almost the whole island from top to bottom of Manhattan. Well, not exactly the whole island, maybe about half of it. But from very high into Manhattan.
I've never been, so I'm looking forward to actually coming to visit. But go on, carry on. Don't let me disturb.
It's great because for me it was I hadn't been around big buildings before. I mean, I did grow up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, so it was slightly different. Being around big buildings and life, and you see the culture right next to you. You see so many cultures, and it's a very pedestrian, which is not LA. That's why so many people don't like LA. Now, you told me you were in London, right? Or you reside in London at least, right?
Yes.
London's my hometown. London, right. London is a proper city. You could walk around. There's people walking on the streets. In Los Angeles, you never see people walking on the streets. It's always in cars.
So without a car in Los Angeles, you're screwed, basically.
Exactly. I don't miss driving. Of course, I do drive, but I don't miss driving. And just being around the culture and being amongst culture and being walking beside culture and saying, oh, wow, that's a museum right there. And just keep on walking instead of driving by. There's a different feel that I have in walking.
Like an immersion in the people, like the zeitgeist of the city, or the spirit of the soul of different neighborhoods. Exactly. That you don't get in the car. Yeah, no, completely. So one of the things that interested me was your interest or your interest in Japanese culture.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so how did this come about? What did you do? How did you explore it? And what is it that drew you to Japanese culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I had a better answer for it. I know the good textbook answer that everybody should give. Oh, it's because Japanese culture is so beautiful and I fell in love with the culture and blah, 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 blah. And kind of all of that is true. But I told this story one time to a colleague because a colleague asked the exact same question. And my response was, I don't know. It's kind of like falling in love with a lover. And is there any purpose to it? Is there it just kind of happens. At least that was my experience. Yes, I happened to fall in love with this lover, but
Okay.
it could have just as easily been some other lover. It could have been
Okay.
just as easily been Russian culture or French culture or Greek culture or something. But for some reason, I met Japanese culture and it fell in my lap in some weird way. And I stuck with her, you know, in the same way with a lover.
Did you meet your lover? How did you meet this lover? I mean, was it in LA or was it, or did this happen when you were in New York? Because for me, okay, I've got a very rudimentary love of Japanese culture. Actually, I'm going to tell you straight. It happened through anime. Started watching Dragon Ball Z when I was about 11 years old.
Right.
From there, just started going from anime to anime to anime. And these anime, I mean, people back then were taking the mick out of me because, you know, they're like, we're watching cartoons. But there's such deep, life-changing lessons to learn from these, especially when you go into the history of what the stories that these animes are put together from. Like, I think one of the most famous ones is Journey to the West.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, that one's Chinese. But yeah, I mean, it's just that fascination we have. Right, yeah. But I'm sure it was adapted into some anime. I mean, the original story from about 400 years ago is Chinese, but I'm sure they've got an anime about it. I'm sure the Japanese animators have done it. So no, very similar to you. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. No. So I mean, it's for me like it was very interesting reading about all these ancient archetypes, these hero archetypes that they used, and well, whether it be in kabuki theater or whether it be in have you ever been to Japan? Have you been there? Have you
Yeah, as a matter of fact, very much like you, I was, I guess, as a child enamored with the Japanese pop culture, like the animation and stuff like that, and the comic books. However, I wasn't as smart as you. I just liked, you know, you're talking about how deep everything was. When I was a kid, I was rather stupid, and I just liked the flashing lights. I liked the big explosions. I liked the naked girls. I liked the action and the shooting and the giant robots and things like that.
All the bits came later. When I was younger, it was the explosions, the fighting, all that stuff. Yeah, deep from the beginning. No, but carry on.
So very much, and I'm going to go in a different direction for a quick second, but I'll bring it back.
Cool.
Very much how I was attracted to music. And I picked up guitar, and I picked up guitar as about the same time as many people that I was with in secondary school, in high school. And we were all playing the same stuff, and I liked all the same stuff. But I've always been attracted to the something different. I'm like, wait, if everybody else is playing punk music, for example, which is fun and easy, and of course it's exciting and things like this, I want to figure out something else and see if I could get into other kinds of things. So of course I got into very odd music, and I learned about guitar and how to play guitar in very odd ways that weren't always friendly. Now let's bring this back to Japanese culture, right?
Odd ways first. Wait, bring it back. What do you mean by odd ways?
And so with Japanese culture, of course, I was enamored with all the same things that all of us children were enamored with. However, then you know, at some point I said, I want to know more. I want to get deeper because, listen, yes, I like the explosions. I like giant robots, but I want to get into the more obscure things. And the obscure and not even Gundam. I mean, like, go way deep and you know, into back alleys, into the back alleys of Tokyo to find these weird comics that you have to know a secret password on the door to knock on. Now I'm exaggerating a little bit, but something along those lines. And so that's why I really got a lot more into Japanese culture, because I wanted to learn more than just my friends who were all into the giant robots and explosions and, you know, girls with big breasts being drawn and everything bouncing around everywhere. I'm like, wait, I ended up living in Japan. Unfortunately, I stayed for less than a year, but it was quite a eventful experience for me. You know, I was like, wait, I've always wanted to live in a foreign place. My father's an immigrant to America from Greece. I always enamored, or I was always fascinated with the experience, I guess you could say. Or, and now you'll forgive me. You'll forgive me. I'm an ugly American. I only speak one language. I don't really, I don't go very far beyond my borders, unfortunately, for better or for worse. I don't know much about other cultures, but I've always wanted to. And so I said, listen, for whatever reason, it was either Germany or Japan. And I ended up in Japan. So I ended up in Japan for a little bit less than a year and really dove deep while there.
When was this? How old were you? How old are you now? And what was the choice? Was it to study, to go and visit? So when was it?
I guess it was 2007. I was born in 78. I don't know how old that makes me now. I think I had a birthday recently. I lose track. 1978 never changes. But,
okay.
So you do the math. Yeah, I went because of I just wanted to really dive deep. I always felt like you can't learn about a culture from reading books, or you could only learn so much. And I tell many of my students this even today is I frequently say, listen, man, if you're going to learn how to swim, don't listen to me tell you how to swim. I'm not going to lecture you about how to swim. Don't read books about swimming. Don't watch YouTube videos about swimming. If you want to learn how to swim, you got to jump in the pool, man. You got to jump in the water and start kicking and paddling.
It's very interesting you say that because, there are many people that follow Buddhism, for instance, which is the ways of Buddha, and they are following Buddha to become enlightened, like Buddha. However, I always think, how can you become enlightened if you're following Buddha? Buddha only became enlightened because of his own life experiences. So therefore, you cannot become enlightened or discover something through someone else. I mean, you can learn about something through someone else, but you can only discover it when you experience it yourself.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. That's absolutely right. I mean, everybody's going to have their own enlightenment. And there was that sort of thing where I was reading all these Buddhist books. And that was part of my Japanese journey too. I dived really deep into Buddhism. And of course, it taught me a lot. But of course, it's a different sort of lifestyle. And my course took me somewhere else.
Spiritually now, would you say a Buddhist, Christian?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I was raised in the Greek Orthodox faith, but I don't know where I would be today. I don't know how you would call it today. There's certain, when I teach philosophy of religion, for example, we really dive deep into what a complicated question that is. What a complicated question that is. Is there a God?
Before we get sidetracked, because that can come first. When you got to Japan, what happened? What was that culture shock? Did you enjoy it? Do you love it? Where were you staying? Did you stay with the local family? Did you have friends there? Tell us your story. Where were you?
Yeah, I was outside of in a prefecture called Saitama. It was about an hour train ride into Tokyo. And it's very funny because that's a very similar question you asked about going to New York, right? And my first hunch is, no, I didn't really feel culture shock when I went to New York, but that's not true. And I'll tell you why. When I came to New York, it was the first time I had lived all by myself. I didn't even have I didn't even have a proper accommodation, to be honest with you. And how I survived is, I don't know, by the grace of God or something like that. I got very lucky. And it was a little bit easier moving to Japan because I had a job lined up for me. And so they had set up everything for me. I was an English teacher.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Yeah. And so that
high school, junior school, businesses,
like a private school,
okay.
Private individuals. And so that was nice. And just like New York, though, the first, the first short span, of course I was excited and my adrenaline was up. And it was just like when I moved to New York, right? My adrenaline was up. But then there is a time when it's like, everything seems to be going wrong here. Am I a fish out of water? There's a moment when the luster wears off. And I'm going to bring back the analogy of the lover again.
right?
Oh, go ahead.
The honeymoon period was over at one point.
Exactly. I mean, just like a lover. I love how you went with the lover analogy too. And it really did get me dark, and very similar to how I moved to New York. However, you asked about the culture shock. I do feel like the culture shock was much more dramatic moving to Japan. I didn't know the language, I knew the language enough to get around, to survive. So that was fortunate enough, but very shocking, and just different little things really stuck out. And here was, I think, now that I'm more mature, I said I was born in 78. That puts me somewhere in my 40s, 44,
okay,
45, 40. Something like that. Yeah, 44. And
okay, cool. You're a mature individual.
Right. I'm much more mature now, whereas I did this was in 2007, I believe. 2007 or 2008, I was in Japan. And it was so much less mature, so I was looking to be culture shocked. But as I stayed there for a bit longer, and I was talking to a friend that I made there, I said, man, I don't know if I could survive here. It's just way too different. And here's how my friend, Tony, actually an Australian, here's how he put it so perfectly. He said, listen, man, you're from New York. Haven't you had bad days in New York? Well, yeah, I have. And he goes, haven't some of those bad days lasted like a week? I'm like, yeah. That's all that's happening here, man. You're just having a bad day, and it just happens to be a bad day in Japan. You know, don't blame Japan, right? It's not, and don't blame yourself. This is just, we have bad days. They're bad days for different reasons, but I have bad days frequently, even now in my maturity. And this was a bad day in Japan. In
just another place. So what caused these dark days? Like, what caused you to be down? Were you missing home? Or was it missing family?
I guess you could say that. There was the fish out of water experience too. Things were so radically different. But were they really radically different? You know, I felt like in my immaturity, I was looking for things to be different. And I was looking for, you brought up Buddhism a second ago. I was really into my Buddhist studies back then. And so I wanted to find every Buddhist teacher I could find while there. And I was walking around asking strangers, basically, hey, tell me about Buddhism. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about, man? I got to get to work, you know? And it's like, oh yeah, are these people really different from New Yorkers, right? Like, stop bothering me, man. What are you talking about Buddhism for, you know? I got things to do. And at some point that did dawn on me that it was me looking for differences. And
you're being
like that.
Right, you're being the annoying.
Exactly. The ugly American again. That's like, oh, why don't you do things this way? You know, I don't know if you studied. Exactly. Right. I don't know if you studied foreign languages, but sometimes when I work with foreign languages and students, I always ask them, have you ever had this experience? And I remember being a young, stupid kid is, wow, this language doesn't make sense. Why does it do that? Right? Why does the verb conjugate this way? That doesn't make sense. And it's like, what are you talking about? Shut up.
Completely. But you see, here's the thing. Like, it's only, I think, just as you said about going to live somewhere. When you go and live somewhere, then you understand the people there a whole lot more. And the same thing is when you learn a language, you learn how the people think.
Right.
So I think you know, definitely when going through philosophy, you're going through Plato, Aristotle, probably reading, you know, your forefathers actually. So you know, probably
like that. Yeah.
Well, your Greek heritage. So like reading the Odyssey and things like this. You know, for instance, Odysseus. You know, at one point, the reason that he lost all his men was because after killing the Cyclops, who happened to be the son of Poseidon, the Cyclops was blinded. He had no idea who had blinded him. He just knew that he was screwed.
Right.
Odysseus had to scream out from the ship as they were escaping.
Right.
And just so you know, the one that blinded you was Odysseus, son of, I can't remember his father's name now.
Right.
And then at that point, the Cyclops asked his father Poseidon to curse him. And then I asked my classics teacher back in the day, why the hell did Odysseus do that? Screw everyone over, you know.
Right.
Then said, well, look, don't try and imprint the values and thinking of today into the past or into a different culture. Back then, it was a matter of honor for someone. When you screw someone, when you defeat someone, you let them know who did it.
Right.
So I mean, I take that as a little example from your peeps, obviously.
Right.
But
There we go. Yeah.
but so you were in Japan. You were teaching English. So how did this carry on? Proceed to you studying Japanese? Did you learn hiragana, katakana, and all of this? Did you learn the writing? What happened?
Yeah, I was certainly studying the language, but I felt an obligation, I suppose, to learn about history too, and that kind of that messes with you to a certain degree too, right? Because then I'm reading about samurai history and even ancient Japanese history and things like that, and
I knew people. I knew people.
Exactly. Right. From way back, and there's still a very touchy issue up in Japan even today, right? So yeah, reading about all these different things, and then of course asking the people, wait, tell me about this history, and they're like, wait a second, do you walk up to New Yorkers and ask them, hey, tell me about the Civil War, right? Of course not.
Before we continue, for anyone listening that doesn't know who the Ainu people are, I think you can develop on this, because I'm just going to give a rudimentary idea of what I know. The Ainu people are the let's say Aboriginal people of Japan. They are the initial people that lived in Japan. They actually are a bit like, from what I've seen, they resemble Australian Aborigines quite a bit. Am I wrong? Am I wrong there? Would you like to
I would revise some of what you said a little bit. They are a native peoples from the Japanese archipelago, and of course there were many. There were many, and I mean, this is the way the ancient and prehistoric world is there's always going to be different tribes all over these places, and even in a small set of islands, a small collection of islands, you've got so many diversity is the key here. Different peoples.
I knew it just one. The Ainu people would
one amongst many different peoples. Right. And if you want to call them Aboriginal, I don't know what that means. I mean, no, I know what that means, but I mean, listen, when you get right back to the original people, there's only one place, and there's somewhere in the center of Africa, I think, that all of us come from. And so are there the native peoples of Europe even? What are native peoples of Europe, right? Everybody's, and so those Ainu people clearly came from somewhere, but so did the Japanese people. And for better or for worse, as history progressed, one kind of Japanese people dominated the archipelago and subjugated other peoples, amongst whom some of whom are the Ainu people in the north. And yeah, they're kind of in the north, what today we call Hokkaido. However, there's other similar problems, even in the far south and west, in the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, where a lot of people want to say, wait a second, we are our own people. Okay, fine, Japan rules us. We're under this flag, this white flag with the red sun on it. However, we are our own people too. We are the Ryukyu people, who might say, we have, we want our own respect. I love that comment right there, right? We do need our own respect. And as such, we have our own language. We have our own culture. We have our own practices, right? So yeah, amongst many, and this is where Japanese culture gets interesting when you really study deep into it, is the fact that there isn't one. Japan is a lot more diverse than people might think. Like you think, oh, Japanese people are only Japanese, right? America, of course, we don't get this because America is such there's so much diversity, for better or for worse, and there is that assumption already, or this understanding. Whereas in a place like Japan, and there's a lot of people in Japan still today that will say, I mean, I'm talking hard politics now, so forgive me here, but there are some people that will say, no, there is one Japanese people and one language should be spoken, right? And we hear these kinds of these kind of discourses all over the place. And you brought up Australia earlier. and our friend here, my friend Cassian, how you doing? Has brought it reminds us of the Australian issue too, which they're still trying to struggle with this. How do we balance and respect different and competing cultures within what we call borders, I guess, right? And by the way, you were talking about even in the UK, they're still dealing with this, even though everybody's got a skin that's more resembling my skin than yours, more or less the dominant culture. Even there, you've got Scottish people who are like, we are Scottish. We want this, right? We are Irish. We're not British or something like that, right? Yeah.
The strange thing is, obviously, when most people think of Japan, you think about homogeneity. So homogeneous people. You wouldn't really think that there are people of many different cultures and languages. How many different languages are there in Japan?
Well, I mean, and that's going to be a political question too, right? I don't want to get too much into it, but of course, some linguists will try to distinguish between a language and a dialect, and then even smaller than a dialect, maybe different accents. Yeah, in the UK, there's a lot of different dialects or accents or even languages, and depending on your politics, you'll say, no, this isn't a dialect, this is a language. Right, or something like that. I don't want to get into the beef there, but there are many different people that will, and some linguists will come out and try to say, oh no, this is what a language is, right? There's only one language, and everybody else is, just a spin-off of that language. It's like, okay,
so
yeah, go ahead.
George, so moving forward, did you start to study Japanese in university, or what happened there? Where
you did ask that question. Listen, don't tell any of my bosses or my supervisors. I hope nobody important. I hope none of my bosses are listening to this. But my problem is I've never taken one course in Japanese anything at university or anything. Yeah, so it's just sort of self-motivated learning that I really got into it. Yeah, and just read stacks of books. I went to the library, checked out the free library, and checked out a lot of books. Read, studied, analyzed. I already had my reading abilities really, and my analytical abilities from my philosophical education. And as such, I just applied a lot of those techniques to reading Japanese culture, history, and so on.
So when you talk about your philosophical education, expand on that. What's your philosophical education?
So I went to in undergraduate at university. I studied philosophy. Why?
Where was that?
In California. At a local school called California Polytechnic in Pomona, and California State Polytechnic. And it was nice. I don't know what drew me to philosophy. I didn't know what philosophy. I'll be honest with you. I didn't know what philosophy was.
That Greek blood does that running through you.
So perhaps, man, perhaps. And I just said, listen, I want to get into this. I'm curious about this, and something drew me in, and I stuck with it. So I stuck with philosophy for a long time, and then I went. And my goal was, of course, to be a philosophy professor. Just follow all the way through, get my doctorate and all that. Then I came to New York finally for graduate school, and I came to New York, for graduate school in philosophy. And that was kind of like I said, at university, at undergraduate university, I was like a big fish in a small pond. But then when I went to graduate school,
explain being fish. Explain being the big fish in a small pond. What do you mean by that?
There was a handful of us who were really sharp students in my cohort at university. And we were on top of it. We loved it. We really dove deep into philosophy. But there was only a handful of us. And so I felt like, we are the philosophers here on campus, so to speak. However, and that was just a feeling, by the way. I don't know that my memories are entirely accurate. But then when I came to graduate school, whereas in undergraduate, I felt so intelligent, so smart. I was like, oh man, I'm amongst the best students here. Then I went to graduate school, and boy, oh boy, did they put me in my place and said, you've got a whole lot of education to learn first,
Nothing like being humble. Okay, so
exactly. So that was that.
How did this help you when it came to viewing Japanese culture? And do you have any favorite philosophers or
Yeah.
Japanese?
Right. I mean, listen, of course, let me answer the first question. How did it help me? Well, number one, I learned how to read, right? I learned how to read, and it sounds, I guess, a little bit obvious, but I learned how to read carefully, and I learned how to read slowly, and I really learned how to try to read in between the lines, because philosophy is hard reading, man. Philosophy is hard. It's some of it got complicated, and that's why, like I said, I felt I was humbled, right, in graduate school, because some of that stuff was just beyond me. And so that's when I did decide to go back into Japanese studies, or really focus on Japanese studies. By the way, the reason I was in philosophy anyways was for all the big questions. You mentioned Aristotle and Plato a moment ago. And those were the questions I was more concerned with in philosophy was, wait, what's the meaning of life? How do you live a good life? You know, what is this all about? Whereas in graduate school, go ahead.
Go on. What are your thoughts on that? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I wake up in the morning, look at my hand, look around me, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Why is this? Why am I here? What is this? What's going on? Look outside, and there are all these cars, sky, and you're like, just like, why?
Yeah.
And then one thing that really got is that, I'd look at a car, I'd look at a plane, I'd look at a deck, I look at a building, and I realized that, wait, so everything I'm seeing here was at one point the dream of somebody. So everything here is something that human beings have taken from the spiritual realm and brought it into the physical realm, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So then I realized there's actually nothing that a human being can dream that can't be made into reality, which is
go. Right.
What exactly are we?
Yeah, so exactly everything you just said. Those are the kinds of thoughts, those are the kinds of insights, those are the kinds of examinations that I wanted to focus on in philosophy. But in graduate school, it was more about, how do we break up sentences? It was almost like a basic grammar, but taken to a terribly high degree. And what is the meaning of a word and things like that, which is, by the way, very important. But it got me to the point where I was, it was far too, it was resembling physics. It was resembling physics or the hard sciences a lot more than it was, for me, resembling the questions that you just asked, right? And the insights that you were expressing. And so that did, unfortunately, for better or for worse, it took me away from philosophy. And I said, wait, I need to get into the spiritual aspects. And of course, that's when I started my Buddhist studies. And of course, that took me into Japanese studies and things like that. And just kind of, because there was something on the surface of Zen Buddhism, whatever that is, that drew me in. And so I said, wait, I want to get into this. I want to read those sorts of things. And yeah, realize my life and where is my place in this garden that we're calling life, right? That Cassie mentions right there, because those questions weren't being examined where I was studying philosophy in graduate school, where it was becoming a much more technical, much more analytic. I don't want to say there's a problem with technicality. I don't think there's a problem with over analyzing things, but I do. It wasn't the questions that I was interested in, right? And so it drew me away, and they kind of pushed me away, and that really took me into Japanese studies. And
you see, you said you grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church,
a little bit here and there, technically, but yeah.
So did you not find any of these answers at all answered there within the Greek Orthodox Catholic Church?
I don't, not for me at least. Again, there was the technicality. there was the technicality of it. And of course, my family wasn't terribly religious. I was baptized technically, and we went to church on some of the holiest days, every other Easter, maybe every other Christmas. And then it sort of faded off, of course. So my faith dropped off. But the reason I wasn't drawn back to my classical or my traditional religions is because my experience with those religions was just going to church on Sundays and reading through the same liturgy every Sunday. And I'm like, wait a second. By the way, now I recognize the importance of that. But as right. But as somebody who had the questions, I was like, wait a second, why these aren't the questions, and memorizing the Lord's Prayer and memorizing the Nicene Creed, it wasn't doing it for me. I was like, okay, I get it, but I want more. And every Sunday wasn't answering those questions, for better or for worse. Or maybe I was too dense to answer, to realize how they were being answered. So it drew me into other things, like Zen Buddhism, for example. Yeah.
I mean, you're being a bit harsh on yourself when you're saying dense. Christianity, just going through the motions, basically. You don't really know why we're doing it. Like, why we're going to church, and it's one thing that brought me back actually to this Catholicism, to look at it differently, when I realized that it's an Eastern religion. It's not from the West. Christianity is an Eastern religion.
Right.
A lot of the mysticism, I realized that a lot of the mysticism,
right.
Within Buddhism, Taoism, or any of these, or Hinduism, even a lot of the mysticism is actually within Christianity as well. I mean, especially when you look at things like the Rosary, for instance, in Catholicism, which are prayers. Buddhists have prayers, Muslims have prayers, Jews have prayers, Hindus have prayers, and then also when the priest is going down the middle, down the altar, and he's shaking that metal thing, the incense coming out. That's incense. It's to purify the air spiritually, which you find once again in Buddhism, you find it once again in Hinduism, you find it once again in Judaism, you find it once again in Islam as well. And so there's so many things joining all of these. So I think faiths, all these religions are a bit like different languages to explain the divine. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. And well, I mean, the reason I called myself dense before is because I didn't recognize that, and I didn't recognize because it was too ordinary for me, or something like that. I didn't recognize the mysticism that was right in front of me. Right? Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you package it as Zen Buddhism from Japan, it seems like something exotic, something mystical, or something like that. So, and that's what I needed. Whereas exactly right now, I'm, like I said, mature enough that I could recognize all of these different things. And yeah, exactly. There are all of these different multiplicities that are coming from everywhere. Christianity is such a diverse religion too. And not only Christianity, but all these religions are so diverse and influenced from everywhere. You were very wise to mention how, or to recognize, to remind us that Christianity, one of my earphones fell out. 1 second. One of the, all of these religions have been influenced through history from so many diverse places, and I don't think there is anything unreasonable about saying, wait, that makes sense to me, and picking and mixing what you like. I think that makes all the sense in the world, as a matter of fact. Responding to Castian's point right there, because it is just like that, hey, wait a second, that part I like. I'm not sure about that, because aren't we all trying to figure it out? Right? We're all trying to figure out this weird thing, this weird thing that we're dealing with here, right?
But okay, so how did this? When did the music come into play, and the movie making come into play? Okay, obviously, before we get on to all of that, actually, like, please. When you went to Japan, have any really good experiences with any of the local people? Did you or did you find yourself more looking from the outside in?
Right.
Because I mean, in a few months, I think in about 6 months, I guess that is not enough time to really dive in and become part of the local culture.
No, you're absolutely right. It wasn't enough time. It wasn't enough time. I wish I could still be there. And by the way, my initial plan was to be there for a few years. But, through a confluence of events, I had to return to America for better or for worse. But here I am today, right? And I have been back since. Talking about one of those great experiences, one thing that I like about New York, and not just New York, but cities in general, is people. And I didn't really get people when I lived in Los Angeles because I lived in the suburbs and it was a very car-centric culture, right? If you want people, you got to go to bars or something like that, or to church, right? Which I wasn't doing much of. So I just liked very much of my practice, my practice in New York or in Japan was just sitting in a park and watching people and waiting for people. And so many times here in New York and in Tokyo, Japan, I had the experience where somebody would just come up and sit next to me and we just start talking. And we just start talking about things. A mix of whatever mongrel languages we could figure out. But yeah, and that's what's amazing to me is that people want to communicate. And even though my Japanese wasn't up to par, even though their English wasn't up to par, we communicated just fine, man. We communicated just fine. There's more than just what comes out of here that involves communication, right? And so you're talking about one of those lovely examples, one of those experiences that's so dear to me was just talking. I was walking through a park and like a ugly tourist snapping pictures, and some guy just starts talking to me about things. Now you'll forgive me because I'm a little bit hardened by New York, so I was like, well, is this guy gonna? I'm looking around going, is he trying to pull one on me? But, after we're talking for a bit, I realized this was a good experience. And we're just talking, man. We're just talking. Another experience. It really, I forget now. It's so funny. I've had people tell me, students who say, George, I'll tell you what, I like you. I loved your class. But I'll tell you what, I'm not going to remember anything from your class. I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't make me feel good. But then what this girl said, she goes, but I'm going to remember the feeling.
The feeling.
I'm going to remember the feeling that you gave in us when you were teaching the class, when we were in class with you. I'm not going to remember the details of Plato and Aristotle. I'm like, come on, man, I thought that was the point. But then she said, no, it is about the feeling. And to me, that was way more important about what I totally am all on board with what that student told me. And now I'm expressing that point regarding talking to this gentleman in the park. Another experience was, I walked into a guitar store one day in Tokyo. And, because I was like, guitar store, this is awesome. I got to go into the guitar store. And it was call like a boutique guitar store. And then here I am looking like a stupid kid and going, wait, I want to try that guitar. And it was one of the expensive ones, of course. And then the guy's like, come on, man. We're not going to let you play the expensive stuff. You're just some dingbat who just wandered in the store. I said, okay, I totally understand. Let me play one of these little things then, one of the cheaper things. And I'm playing, and then the guy goes, oh, wow, that's great. And we're talking about music through music, right? And then he said, by the way, here, what's one of those expensive guitars did you want to play now? And he pulls down the guitar and lets me play one of the nice guitars. And I was like, oh, thanks so much. And we're talking about music, we're communicating about music through music. And you were asking me a second ago, wait, let's talk about music and filmmaking. Oh, no, before we move on, let's talk about your experience in Japan or good experiences. But that's
these things.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything's melding together so beautifully because isn't that what life is? It's so common. And I see a lot of people amongst my colleagues, amongst my friends who want to compartmentalize. Oh, you are a philosophy professor. Why do you present yourself as a filmmaker and as a musician and as a this or as an artist? or as an animator. And I'm like, wait a second, man, this is what this thing does. Yeah, this thing called George. I don't want to compartmentalize. And there is, I think, a certain aspect of our culture that wants to say, wait, you can only be one thing, or you can only be an expert in one thing. And I'm engaging with a lot of artists, actually, who have this experience with me, because I'll tell you right now, man, I'll tell you right now, I'm not the best musician there is. Far from it. Far from it. I'm not the best filmmaker there is. I'm not the best philosopher there is. I'm not the best Japanese guy there is. However, how do I wrestle with that? And sometimes I do wrestle with that, and I look around my colleagues and I say, wow, you guys are so much brighter and so much more insightful when it comes to philosophy than I. However, here's what I do bring to the table is I am able to bring in all these diverse experiences, music, bring in music to philosophy, bring in filmmaking to philosophy, bring in music to Japanese culture. And I'm able to connect all these things that a lot of these experts, they wouldn't make those connections, and they wouldn't say, oh, wow, how do we understand, for example, music has equal temperament. Western music, we have 12-tone equal temperament. What does that mean about philosophy, the philosophy of, metaphysics, about reality? And I'll bring in these examples, and they go, wow, you know something about music that, by the way, there are philosophers.
Consider it from a different.
Exactly. But I'm just bringing in a different example, just like you're bringing in the Odyssey and Odysseus, just like you're bringing in Homer, just like you're bringing in the Londoner experience to Edinburgh. And it's, there is an opportunity for the diverse perspectives to come together to create something. And my hunch is the music I make is only because of my experiences with Japan, is only because of my experiences with philosophy, and only because of my experiences with filmmaking too, that I'm able to see all these different things in a way that this thing called George can do it. And that's what I bring to the table, for better or worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To tell the truth, look around at life in general. Everything is maths. Everything is physics. Everything is art. Everything is different frequencies. For instance, one example is I'd like to give is when I went to Egypt and I saw the pyramids, and I was just absolutely into these things.
Yeah.
I could not believe what I was saying, because this in just these structures you had perfect astronomy, you had physics, you had mathematics, you had architecture, you have art, you have and they all come together in one structure, and you are able to view it together as one structure. Maybe there's a different way of people learning. Who was that famous Italian inventor? Not Vincent. Is it Van Gogh? No, Van Gogh.
Da Vinci, maybe? I don't know. Da Vinci was a painter and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Da Vinci was a classical Renaissance man. He mixed everything. Right. He had this thing, I think they called it. He called curiosita, which is curiosity.
Right.
He would train each one of his senses to the max. So, his drawings of birds, for instance, in mid-flight, who can do that?
Yeah.
It's just that he would sit there and stare and stare and stare, right, until he was able to catch a bird in mid-flight and able to kill that. He would sit down in silence for hours until he could hear his own heartbeat, and then he'd close his eyes, sit down in silence until he could hear his own heartbeat, and then to be able to pick out certain sounds. That's how he became a musician as well. I think there's a certain loss that we have in the modern day where we section things off, where we become production line rather than multifaceted beings that we are. you know.
Yeah,
So,
right, right.
so I say, I completely agree. So,
Yeah, it's something.
right now, where are you lecturing? Who are your students? Where do you lecture?
So here in New York City, I teach with the City University of New York at LaGuardia Community College and other colleges. Sometimes I'm at Baruch College. Sometimes I'm at Borough of Manhattan College and also Toro College throughout New York City. Toro College is separate from the rest of the City University of New York. It's a private school. However, yeah, I teach at many different places. And at every, by the way, talking about that multifaceted aspect, at almost every school, I teach different things. At some schools, I teach Japanese culture. At some schools, I teach something called critical thinking. At other schools, I teach pedagogy. At other schools, I teach philosophy. And so it's, I feel like despite the fact that, yeah, like you said, I don't have, or yeah, that one area of expertise, it's this sort of broad various perspectives that I bring that has allowed me to actually thrive in this environment where, yeah, I'm able to teach at many different schools, many different subjects. Not many, but I can teach different things. So yeah, and my students, because especially at LaGuardia Community College, where is basically my home base, it's a very diverse campus. It's many immigrant students, many inner city students, many students who are not especially wealthy, but so there's a more diverse inner city experience there. And one thing that I reflect upon actually, because before I was there, I taught in the primary schools also here in New York City. And I've always taught in these sort of very urban, what in America we call, I don't know how they call it in the UK, but here we call it inner city environments, which is, the more very urban, very,
We call it inner city urban environment. Yeah, we have to basically, for us, it's a council estates, council flats. We have these high-rise council flats with all these bumped into. Yeah,
right.
I even grew up in one of those areas myself. But that's a story for another day, George. But
that's exactly it. Yeah. So I most of my students are from places similar to that. It seems to me the way you described it.
Do you find it challenging? Do you find the teaching?
No, I mean, I guess there's something about me that, yeah, I just, I don't want to say I'm natural at it because I wasn't. It was a long sort of journey, but I am I do believe in my practice. I do believe in what I do now, and I have a lot of faith in how I do things. What I find fascinating, though, is especially for something like philosophy. I teach a lot of philosophy classes and Japanese literature, right? Now, Japanese literature seems like it would have a built-in base, right? Like exactly like you and I were speaking at the beginning of our discussion this afternoon, this morning, is yeah, you would assume that people want to learn about anime and the manga and comics and popular Japanese culture, but rather many of our students that my school enrolls are much more interested in going to university to get a job, right? And to get themselves further financially and increase their earning potentials in the future, which I cannot fault that, of course. I mean, that's how can you fault that? Of course, that's a great a goal to have. However, right. However, one thing that intrigued me that you mentioned a moment ago is that you yourself have that classics education. Right? And that's not terribly popular in America, at least, amongst people who want to go to school to further their financial earning potential, right? I'm not sure that, and by the way, so I'm in a department, in my philosophy department, they do tell us, hey, George, sell the philosophy department. Tell them that they can get any job. You tell them how this will improve their earning potential. And you'll forgive me, but sometimes, again, I hope my bosses aren't listening, but sometimes I say, listen, man, that's not why I'm teaching these classes. I'm sorry, I can't go that far with you. I'm teaching these classes because of all those big questions that you and I have been talking about over the last hour or so.
Basically, I mean, you're given the tools in order to think for themselves.
Right.
We're not supposed to, it's we're all put here with certain tools, and we'll learn along the way. But it's up to us how we put this into action. We just like a parent can't be coddling a child all the way up until 60.
Right.
One of my friends described
that example.
Yeah, one of my friends described it as a bow. You pull the bow back, you're filling it with all this potential, and then you just let the bow go. Some of them hit the bullseye, some of them don't. Some of them drop off in the way. But that's just life, So
that's part of life, yeah.
Yeah, so you can't promise every arrow that they're gonna hit the
target. Right. Tell me about it. That said, you asked me about the students. And so you might assume, given everything that I've said, that students might not like talking about what is the reality of the table in front of you in a philosophy class. However, that's not my experience. That's not my experience. My experience is that most people are like you and me. What do I mean? Most people want to talk about these big questions. Most people, and I love that you gave that example about how you wake up in the morning and you're looking outside and asking these questions, because this is just my hunch, by the way, because you're now saying it, and I experience that all the time, and I share that experience with my students. I say, I'm sorry, but every now and again, I wake up in the middle of the night and I stare at the ceiling in the dark and say, what's going on?
What's going on?
And many of the students go, me too. Many of my students say, I do that too. So yeah, philosophy, it seems to me, is just a natural and asking philosophical questions and engaging with the world in a philosophical way to figure out your purpose is a natural human condition. And we could talk about Japan, we could talk about China, we could talk about, all these different places around the world. But it seems to me that all human beings are trying to answer these big questions. Now, they might answer these questions differently, of course, but aren't we all interested in these questions? And that's what I think philosophy does very nicely, is at least let's answer these questions and let's analyze how different people around the world have, and through history, have tried to address these questions. Why do I get out of bed in the morning, man? Why are you here? Because so many of my students, listen, I don't want to get into too much morality or politics, but a lot of my students will assume, morality is whatever you think. Just everybody's got their own morality. And I say, fine, but you need to come up with your own morality. You need to come up with your own reason. Why did you get out of bed in the morning? Why did you get out of bed this morning, man? Because that's sometimes one of the hardest questions to ask, man.
and so how would you answer that for you? What gets you out of it?
Oh boy. My own path has been very weird. And my own way to address that question has been very, winding, turning paths that, you take one fork of the road instead of this fork in the road. And listen, of course, I deal with bad days and sometimes bad weeks and sometimes bad months, right? A couple of years ago, and maybe it was because of the pandemic. Listen, I don't know. But at the beginning of the pandemic, by coincidence, so that's me being a philosopher. I'm not sure about the cause-effect relationship sometimes. But at the beginning of the pandemic started this really downward spiral for me. And I got really dark. And how am I out of that darkness right now? And it is just about, well, wait a second, man. I'm not sure the answers to all these questions, but I need to give myself goals. I need to give myself purpose. And, one of these purposes right now, over the last couple of years, is actually this movie right here, Totem Chaser. And it sounds like, no, absolutely. But it seems like, listen, that seems selfish to you, right? But here's what I love about filmmaking. Filmmaking is about, you'll see a lot of different people on that poster. Filmmaking is about working with people, man. And having a lot of the goals that engage with people and engage with the community and work with the community. And by the way, there's a lot of people that worked on this movie that you don't see on the poster because they were behind the scenes and just working with people.
What's Totem Chaser about?
Well, listen, Totem Chaser, I tapped into some of these childhood these childhood enamorations that I have with just haunted ghosts, haunted houses, searching for ghosts, things like that.
Okay.
It is primarily about ultimately these guys who are chasing for a totem, looking for a magical totem and what it means and where that path takes them, of course, into mystical and spiritual places. But despite the fact that I went into it with a lot of my childhood eyes and my childhood emotions, because of my maturity, I tried to impart some of these deeper philosophical questions. What is the meaning of life? How much control do we have over life? What is my place amongst the community? Right?
Yeah.
There are so many of those questions that I'm interested in. What is my place? How do I deal with people in the community? How do I treat people next to me? Right? Can I treat them can I use people? Right? So where I try to ask a lot of these moral questions too in the movie. So yeah, it's a lot of that within, of course, a story about somebody who is chasing this spiritual goal that he has, and all the dark places that that spiritual search might take us. Yeah, exactly. And it relates to me, at least, is looking for purpose and where does it get us.
Okay, so a personal story that you made into a work of fiction, basically.
Right. You can say that. You can say that. Yeah.
So George, sadly, because I need to jump on a flight in a little while, I'm gonna have to go.
Yes.
This will not be
wonderful.
The last session that we have, because we barely scratched the surface here. But it's been very nice to meet you. I'm gonna definitely cut this video up and make it, a bit more presentable. But this was very nice to talk to you. Very nice to meet you. Well, hopefully to meet you soon in New York someday. I need to come down and visit with the lady. Do you want to say anything to the viewership? How can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me, of course, on Instagram, George.Tsouris. I think it's dot, isn't it? Yes, I think I've got the dot in there right now. Find the Good Doctors Instagram and follow me there. I explore a lot of things. I've seen so many people so many of my friends, my dear friends, showed up this morning, and I'm so grateful. I didn't say hi to everybody, but I saw you. I promise I saw you. I can't run off all the names right now. I tried to wave when I could. So thank you all so much. Yeah. Thank you, of course, for having me tonight and this afternoon, rather. It was a pleasure. I loved it. I had a blast, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah, and to tell the truth, next time we can make it a little bit longer. I think I'll structure out a little bit more, and we'll make it a little bit longer, and dive a bit more into the movies, into Japan a little bit more, and into the philosophy. Because George has a whole host of philosophy videos as well.
Oh, right.
And okay, so George, we will talk soon. Very nice talking to you. This is ISOM, Individual State of Mind. Scrolls, the first episode. George thought this was my. Is it Tsouris or Tsouris?
You can say it however you like, man. But hey, I've heard so many things through the years, so I'm rather comfortable without saying my name.
Awesome, George. Great talking to you. Okay, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my new friend. We'll continue continue these discussions maybe off camera a little bit, and then we can reconvene at a later date. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much. And nice meeting you guys too.
See ya. Bye bye.
See you.